The Hells Angels are notorious for organized crime, violence, drug dealing, extortion, trafficking, and prostitution. Although the club claims to be innocent, many members have found themselves on the wrong side of the justice system. Here are 5 Hells Angels members reacting to life sentences. Number 1. Adam Lee Hall. Adam Lee Hall, a Hells Angels member, was convicted for the brutal murders of 3 Pittsfield men. The extreme violence displayed by Hall censored the entire community and forced a Hampden Superior Court judge to label the act as one stemming from depravity and without human dignity. It all started in July 2009 when Hall beat one of the victims, David Glasser, with a baseball bat. From there on, Hall tried his best to discredit Glasser as a witness and even framed him for a fake armed robbery. Over the next few years, Glasser was stalked, intimidated, beaten, and abducted by Hall, all so he could not testify against him in court. However, Glasser could never have imagined that Hall would commit the unthinkable crime of murder against him. Hall, along with David Shalhoub and Caius Veiovis, kidnapped, tortured, and killed David Glasser, Edward Frampton, and Robert Chadwell in August 2011. If that wasn't enough, they buried the bodies in Beckett to remove all signs of the crime. When the trial started, all the evidence against the killers was circumstantial. Still, a breakthrough occurred in the form of David Casey's testimony, who charged himself as an accessory in the case. Hall had forced Casey to get rid of the victims' bodies using his excavator. Casey revealed how Hall and his cohorts shot, stabbed, and gutted the victims before chopping their bodies to pieces. The murders were so horrific the details shocked everyone in court. Casey also confessed how Glasser begged for his life, but Hall ignored his pleading, saying, "I warned you what would happen if you testified against me." The Hampden Superior Court found Hall guilty on 3 counts each of murder, kidnapping, and witness intimidation for the gruesome murders of Glasser, Frampton, and Chadwell, and was sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences. The judge admitted he had never seen a crime like this in his career, and the fact that Hall preyed on Glasser and Frampton, both of who were disabled with mental and developmental issues, demonstrated his ruthless mindset and the dangerous extent to which he was willing to go to keep himself safe. Can you imagine how Hall reacted to his life sentence? He looked undisturbed, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. If you're shocked by his reaction, you'll never believe how the next Hells Angels member on our list welcomed his final sentencing. Number 2. Emery Martin. Emery Martin, also known by the nickname Pitt, had witnessed Quebec's violent biker war, but nothing prepared him for the horrors he witnessed inside a New Brunswick jail. Martin has spent 20 years of his life in prison and has been a Hells Angel for over 24 years. He started his journey from the Montreal chapter of the Motorcycle Club, but switched to the New Brunswick Nomad chapter in November 2016. This enabled him to control a drug ring so strong that authorities couldn't wrap their heads around it. But like all good things must come to an end, Martin's reign as a senior executive of a massive interprovincial cocaine ring came to a halt when an RCMP-led investigation resulted in his arrest in 2018, along with several others. The investigation, Project J Thunderstruck, aimed to identify key players in high-volume bulk cocaine trafficking from Quebec into New Brunswick. During his trial, the prosecutor argued that without Martin, there would have been no drugs to sell, and the judge, Justice Denise LeBlanc, couldn't help but agree. She wrote in her ruling, "His status as a member of the NB Hells Angels Nomad gave him the power to direct cocaine trafficking in the territory he controlled. The network, without Mr. Martin's permission, would not have been able to traffic cocaine on its territory." Martin's strategy was simple and required little effort on his part. Can you guess what it was? He introduced the supplier of uncut cocaine in Quebec to a group of New Brunswick traffickers led by Marcel Friolet. Under Martin's rule, Friolet's men were allowed to sell cocaine in northeastern New Brunswick. In return for a tax, they'd pay Martin on every sale. And just like that, he enjoyed commission on trafficking sales without doing much work for his money. Can you believe that almost 96 kilos of high-quality cocaine were moved from May 2016 to July 2017, all under Martin's supervision? The judge gave Martin 8 years in prison, but later chopped off 6 months from his sentence, following a distasteful incident behind bars. Coming up next, Hells Angels members who brutally took an innocent life to satisfy their egos. Brace yourself for a chilling tale of reckless power. Number 3. Norman Cox and Rob Thomas. These men were full-patch members of Hell's Angels when they violently killed an unarmed Kelowna man, Diane Phillips, in 2011. Phillips was 51 at the time of the unfortunate incident. It all started when his two sons got into an argument with two other teenagers who were connected to the Hell's Angels. Phillips intervened to resolve the conflict, but his peaceful attempts were met with the brutal attack of Norman Cox and Rob Thomas. The two assaulted Phillips with a baseball bat and hammer, reducing his form to a pulp. The shocking attack brought considerable grief to the family, which became evident in Janine's victim impact statement. Phillips' wife told the court that the father of her 3 children was a warm-hearted presence, and that his absence had left a palpable void in their family. She stressed how Phillips was violently ripped from their lives, and she was left to grapple with the dark reality of being a widow. Cox and Thomas left Phillips in such a terrible state that his wife suffered a heart attack when she saw her husband's lifeless, unrecognizable body. Can you imagine the pain Phillips's family must have gone through? One parent was brutally murdered, and the other was in a hospital bed with a severe heart condition. And all for what? To satisfy the ego of the full-patch Hell's Angels members? According to reports, when Thomas confronted Phillips with a baseball bat and hammer, he kept saying how he dared mess with the Hell's Angels. During the trial, both bikers pleaded guilty to the 2011 homicide and were sentenced to 15 years in prison. The superintendent hoped the guilty plea would bring some sort of closure to those who loved Phillips. If you thought Cox and Thomas's actions were brutal, wait until you hear the story of another Hell's Angels member who mistreated his partner, whom he had promised to love and protect. Number 4. Zane Para Wallace. This is Zane Wallace, a Hell's Angels prospect who sadistically took the life of his partner, Jasmine Tamara Wilson. Wallace had a long history of violence before he met Wilson, and her warmth and love could do nothing to change the monster inside him. Wallace assaulted Wilson repeatedly on several occasions, which led to Wilson's family holding themselves in contempt for staying quiet for as long as they did. Had they spoken up sooner, maybe Wilson would be alive. Do you agree? The fatal assault started with an argument on July 30th, 2019, after which Wallace repeatedly punched Wilson in the head. While she survived the first attack, she wasn't as lucky when he shoved her head twice into the wall the next day. The second her head hit the wall, Wilson's body went limp. That's when Wallace realized he had gone too far. He immediately called his father for help, who put her in a car and contacted Wallace's mother, who subsequently reached out to her daughter. Wallace's family devised a plan to mislead the authorities and conceal how Wilson had injured her head. They even told the hospital staff different versions of how Wilson had suffered her injuries and misdirected police investigations for a while. All 3 were sentenced for perverting the course of justice in Wilson's death. An experienced police officer, Detective Senior Sergeant Neil Forlong, admitted that Wilson's injuries were some of the worst he had seen. Wilson could not survive the assault and died on August 2, 2019, in Wellington Hospital. Her family was shattered as they were aware of Wallace's narcissistic behavior and failed to avert their daughter's death. Emotions ran high when Wilson and Wallace's families came to blows in the courtroom gallery as Wallace was taken away to the courthouse cell. The situation got heated when many of Wilson's family members called out to him saying, "Burn in hell," while police officers tried their best to keep both families apart. Wallace pleaded guilty to Wilson's murder and admitted to attacking her multiple times. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 15 years and 6 months for murdering Wilson. Wallace's attempt to mislead the police backfired, just like the next Hell's Angels member who was cleverly bested by the authorities. Number 5. Brian Shane Henson. Brian Shane Henson was a prospective member of the Merced chapter of the Hell's Angels Motorcycle Club when he negotiated a deal to sell 1 pound of methamphetamine and 4 ounces of marijuana in exchange for 20 stolen firearms. Henson, who was 40 at the time, thought he had struck the deal of a lifetime, but little did he know that the man he was negotiating with was an undercover agent of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. Henson negotiated the deal for a week and finally drove from Merced to Needles, California, with co-defendant Hussein Fawaz El-Tareb to meet the undercover agent. Once they reached Needles, Henson handed over the methamphetamine and marijuana to the agent and took possession of the 20 firearms he placed in El-Tareb's car's trunk. Only a few seconds later, the authorities swarmed in and arrested Henson and Eltereb. They also retrieved a .38 caliber revolver from Eltereb's vehicle. Caught red-handed, Henson had little options but to plead guilty. He was sentenced to a mandatory minimum sentence of 180 months in federal custody for distributing methamphetamine and possessing firearms. That's all for today, folks. Thanks for joining us today. Remember to hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and press the notification bell for more shocking courtroom drama.